Hello, this is Bits and Pieces. I am your host, Jasper, and today we will be talking about power supply units, or PSUs. Generally, a power supply unit are placed in computers and are essential to the computer because they are the piece that is going to supply the power to the computer's components. They convert the alternating current, or AC power, from the wall outlets into direct current, or DC power, that the PC is able to use and function properly. Without that DC power powering all of the parts inside of the system, it will not turn on and will not run. And if there is too much power, it will completely fry the parts and you will have a very expensive brick on your hands, which is not something you want. There are a few major things you need to consider when looking into getting a PSU for your system. The first one is the power rating, or wattage. The power rating is how much power this power supply can produce for the parts within a PC. This is typically measured in watts, hence why it's also called the wattage of the power supply. The higher the number of watts rated for the PSU, the more power it can convert for the PC and the components inside. And it's important to know to ensure that it can supply the whole PC with power, because as I had stated previously, if the power draw of all the parts inside of your system is higher than what your power supply is rated to output, your PC will not turn on. You will also need to make note of the different connectors that come out of the PSU, because there's this giant mess of wires sticking out of one end of the power supply unit, which houses all of the different connectors that you will be connecting to the different components within your PC. You need to ensure that all of the components that you are using in your system have the correct connectors on the PSU to connect to those components. Because if you do not, then you'll need to pay more money to get an adapter or find another power supply with the same watt rating and the required plugs to connect to your parts, which will be more time consuming and likely cost more money. You will also need to consider the airflow of your system, because power supplies have fans built into them to allow them to pull air out of the computer, as running a PC is typically a very hot procedure for all of the parts inside of the case, and you want to make sure that none of the parts overheat, because if that happens, it will shut down the system and it may cause damage to any of the parts inside. So you need to ensure that all of the fans inside are all working together to get cold air in and hot air out. You will also need to consider to make sure that it is plugged in and powered on to make sure it'll work. It is the most important thing, because that is one of the first things that technicians will always ask you if you're going into tech support. It's the whole joke of, have you tried turning it on and off again? And then they'll ask you of, is it plugged in and is it powered on? So you want to make sure that it is plugged in and switched on, because there's a separate switch on the power supply unit that you need to turn on to get it to activate. You'll also need to ensure that it is set to the correct setting for your region, as US and UK wall outlets output different power. They output different watts of power, and you want to make sure that it is set to the right value, because if I remember correctly, it is higher in the UK than it is here in the United States. And so if you have it set to the UK version and you plug it into a US wall outlet, it's not going to turn on. And if you have it set to the US version and plug it into a UK outlet, you're going to fry all of the parts inside your system and have a very expensive brick, and that is not what you want. Also, do note, do not under any circumstances take apart a power supply to fix it. This is very important. Do not take apart a power supply. It is likely that a power supply and the components within can store charge even after you discharge the charge by unplugging it and holding the power button. Even if you do that, the power supply can still have parts that are storing power, and you do not want to take it apart, because that will shock you and most likely hurt you or damage something, and that is not what you want. And so always, if your power supply is not working or if it's broken, do not try to fix it yourself and just replace it as is and buy a whole new power supply. It is not worth it to take it apart and try and fix it.